Welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Thomas Lane. I am the chair of the judges for the BED Architect of the Year Awards. Today we are going to be talking to some past Young Architect of the Year winners about what it meant to win Young Architect of the Year and how their practices have developed since. I'm joined by the founders of 3 architectural practices, Stefanie Rhodes, who is the founding director of Gatti Routh Rhodes, who won Young Architect of the Year last year. Christopher Lee, who is the principal of Serie Architects, who won YAYA in 2010, 10 years ago nearly. And Fergus Feilden, who is the principal of the architectural practice Feilden Fowles, who won Young Architect of the Year in 2016. So first of all, each architect is going to give us a brief overview of their practice, how they set it up, and what it meant to win Young Architect of the Year. And once everyone's presented and said a few words about their practice and maybe shown us some of their projects, we'll then have a discussion amongst ourselves about the challenges of setting up and running a practice. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Stefanie, who's going to tell us all about Gatti Routh Rhodes. Thank you very much, Stefanie.
Thank you. So I'm hoping this is, you can see the right screen. Is that, yep, great, fantastic. So Gatti Routh Rhodes, first of all, thank you for inviting me. And we are, Gatti Routh Rhodes is founded by Richard Gatti, who's on the right hand here, Tom Routh and myself in 2013, and we set up on the back of a successful feasibility study for the Bethnal Green Mission Church. We were very lucky to access that project. Not a very normal thing for a young practice to basically set up with such a large project. Richard Gatti knew a developer and who was working in partnership with the church, and they were getting nowhere with the scheme. So we had a go and were able to put together some ideas that the church, the planners and the developer were able to buy into, which then got us appointed. Tom, Richard and I, we knew each other from the CAS, where we all studied at some point. And we're currently a practice of 5. So sort of working over the last months hasn't been the same as normal. But we're now back to having at least weekly Friday evening catch-up meetings to look at models. We work a lot with models, and that's it's a sort of a socially distant model discussion. Challenges of the early days. Anyone who's worked in a small business knows that workflow is a real issue. It comes either as feast or as famine, and that has got consequences, challenges financially and in sort of work life or sort of work family. Tom and I have both got young children, and getting anything built just takes a very long time. Then there's procurement and trust. How do you convince a client that you can do a project if you haven't done 4 of exactly the same type in the last 3 years? But we were very lucky with Bethnal Green Mission Church because we managed to gain that trust. The work we presented for the YAYA, we've always done variety, target sort of variety in our work. On the smallest project we presented was a self-funded chair, so that's the middle one, and it's you can cut 4 of those out of 1 sheet of ply, and it's engineered to be as light as the Gioponte Superleggero, which it just manages. We also we worked on set designs with professional directors and student acting and stage teams at Guildhall, and to the right is a refurbishment we did in a small Victorian terrace that had its charm and far too small rooms. So we took out a room to create volume and create that connection, light back to the garden. The main project, though, again, is with Bethnal Green Mission Church, so I'm going to talk about that a little. The original building, 1950s building, the church had really sort of had a lot of grief with it. It flooded regularly. It had a myriad of stairs that made it really difficult for anyone with accessibility or mobility issues. they looked at refurbishing it. It would have been in the region of about £2 million, and they had no money. So they set up the partnership with the developer, where the sale of the private apartments funds the redevelopment of the church and community facilities. So fast forward 5 years, and that's Bethnal Green Mission Church now. The mixed-use building has got a church, community spaces, offices, a vicarage, a cafe, and the 14 apartments that have funded the scheme. So for the elevation, we took our cues from the context. It's opposite, diagonally opposite, Grade 1 listed St John on Bethnal Green by Soane. So that's where this sort of pattern of concrete bands and ribs came from, and the brick infill. And we were also keen to improve the public realm. There'd been a lot of issues with antisocial behaviour, and we created this new pathway through to the businesses and railway arches. The cafe itself is on the most prominent corner because it provides that double function of control and sort of welcome to the building for anyone to step in. And the church space itself is defined by, is first of all at the heart of the building, and it's defined by this concrete ceiling and the stained glass. So there isn't anything obvious other than the stained glass about it being a church, but the elements sort of hark back as a reference to traditional churches, like for example the vaulted ceilings. The stained glass, we worked with artist Carly Bigford-Smith, and it's a motif. This sort of weaving is a motif that runs through the building. The section, so we don't have a sort of a manifesto or practice philosophy as such, and we're all are interested in slightly different things and sort of different backgrounds. But what are the themes that we're interested in, that we return to again and again, and I think that those are sort of materials and how to make spaces generous while being efficient, and that's an efficiency of site, of budget, of resources, in terms of sustainability, of how to borrow and overlap spaces to make them beautiful. So you can sort of see this cross section with this scooping. That's this space in particular, the community hall that is in the basement, but gets this sort of delight and volume from this double height space. The apartments were really key because they provided the money for the scheme, and they really have got these fantastic views, expansive views over the surrounding parks and deep terraces. So yeah, so what the YAYA, I'm going to go on to other work in a minute, but sort of what the YAYA gave us was it's a fantastic thing to point to. And it's sort of an important industry prize that is not just for a single project, but for a body of work. And that, I think, has given clients and also other practices that we collaborate with confidence in us. And then it's obviously publicity, but just back to the confidence, it was also, we got that I had, personally speaking, I'd just come back from maternity leave and was trying to sort of juggle having a young baby, running a practice, like, you know, getting more work in, all of that, and it was a fantastic boost. So other work, we were working on a small development of family homes in a village in Hertfordshire. So again, we sort of try to get the variety. We still do and really enjoy doing the residential small-scale refurbishments. Quite a lot have constrained budgets, and that remains something that we do. We're starting work on a mixed-use community and housing development in Lambeth, and we are also working on inserting a church and community centre in a derelict, sort of semi-derelict office, 1960s office building, without actually changing too much. So that's quite exciting. The main project we're working on at the moment is Bethnal Green Methodist Church, which is just around the corner from Bethnal Green Mission Church. So we seem to sort of be developing sort of a line of BGMCs. This is, it's a new build church, community hall, facilities for a charity that works with carers and the elderly, and it's also got housing on the site. And it'll be centred on a new semi-public garden, and they'll also with a sort of colonnade running around and framing that. These are sort of views of we're just literally sort of working on and discussing the entrance with the double height church on the first floor, public cafe, view down in the mews with housing that provides that sort of family housing, and the church that overlooks this new semi-public garden, and will be used by not only by the church for worship, but lots of different activities and meetings. And the colonnade, this generous corridor that frames the entire garden on 4 sides. So that's the overview where we're at the moment, and we're hoping to submit planning for this later this year. But that's it from me for the moment. So.
Great, thanks very much, Stefanie. It sounds like you've got loads of work on. It's really good news. I mean, would you say that sort of winning YAYA sort of helped propel you towards some of these projects?
Yes, I think it comes back to this confidence, because I think it we had, when we won YAYA, we had one, still actually we've got one large completed building, and the rest is this sort of mix of a variety of different things, but sort of quite a bit smaller. And it really was this, it's for a body of work, it's for an approach, it's not just for one scheme, and it sort of gave us a confidence and gave clients also the confidence that this wasn't just a one-hit thing. This was actually the start to more, and that we could, we can deliver that kind of thing consistently. So that was really helpful, and publicity, and it's been really helpful in that. It's been helpful for working with public bodies that always require recognition again for work, the design excellence, however that is demonstrated. So yes, I would definitely say it's been good.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much, Stefanie. So I can hand over now to Christopher.
Okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. Okay. So yeah, my name is Chris. Serie Architects was founded in about 10 years ago by Kapil Gupta in Mumbai and me in London. So I was educated together with Kapil in Architectural Association London. So this was, I think it's a very nice shot. I thought it's the first exhibition of our work after about 2 years of setting up, and then coincided with the winning of YAYA.
Can anyone else hear Chris?
Yeah. So can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you did sort of drop out for a little bit.
Okay, maybe let me pause this. Sorry. Yeah, let me pause this. Yeah, okay. All right. Okay, so yeah, we started off as 2 offices in 2 separate locations, and being very small office. So one of the challenges for us, I mean, both practically as well as conceptually, was how could we maintain a certain consistency whilst working in very diverse contexts. So in that sense, we found ourselves both feeling incredibly rooted in London and as well as in India and Singapore, but at the same time also felt a little bit as outsiders. And looking back, I think this whole notion of being an outsider is quite a productive one, because it allowed us to do two things. One is, of course, it really helped us to commit ourselves to producing architecture that is of its place and of the culture of the place that it is built. And also it allows us to have a very wide-eyed approach to things that are very, very common and ordinary. So in our projects, usually we start off with looking at the most mundane and the most typical, and then to draw on this for our architecture. So this is the first project that we actually submitted for the YAYA 10 years ago. It's for a banqueting hall. It's in a conservation area in Mumbai next to the race course. So we really draw upon, the majestic rain trees, as well as the Victorian architecture that you see in Mumbai. And to then, of course, abstract these very common moments, whether it is material, typology, or construction, and to make it into a work that is somewhat familiar, but also surprising and alluring at the same time. So pretty much, I think this sort of set us off in a trajectory in the practice for the past 10 years. And following YAYA, we were lucky that we won very, very quickly a succession of very big projects, open anonymous competition. So this is for the new Singapore State Courts building. It will be the highest court building in the world. It's nearing completion now. This is taken about 3 months ago. It is now open, but we couldn't officially open it with a ceremony because of COVID. But essentially, it's a high-rise courthouse with 68 courtrooms placed in 2 separate towers, and the towers are joined by 36 bridges. So on the left-hand side is the staff as well as the judges tower, and the other side is the public tower holding the various court boxes. So the court boxes basically sits on an open trace of landscape. And this is nearing completion. When I took it about 6 months back from different parts of Chinatown, you really get a glimpse of the tower in its various thinness and frontalities. Following that win, we also were lucky to have won another mixed-use building. This one combines a community center as well as shopping and hospital in a one single building. So this was completed last year, early last year, and it also won the WAF mixed-use building of the year. Essentially, it's a terrace building with a cascading gardens that brings the public all the way from the water promenade all the way up to the roof, in which on the roof there's a whole range of activities for the community, exercise places, urban farming, gyms, childcare, and so on. So this completed last year. Also, following that win, we also won another competition, again an open competition, but this time round for the School of Design and Environment for National University of Singapore. So this was also completed last year in quick succession. This is a net zero energy building. That is to say that the building produces more, if not equal, to the energy that it consumes. For a building of this size, it's quite a tall order, because in hot tropical climate, the air conditioning load of the building almost consumes about 40% of the entire energy load of the building. So the project here really uses great cantilevers and overhangs to cut heat gain, but at the same time allow certain transparency throughout the building. So to block off the east and west sun, we have a very delicate screen to cut off heat gain but allow views through. And it's one of the first building of this scale that utilizes hybrid cooling and natural ventilation to really cut down the energy consumption to bring it to net zero energy building. So YAYA was very helpful in that sense to sort of put us on the map, so everyone knew us from after the win, and started to invite us to close competition or small invited mini competition. So this is one of them. It's a Jamila Art Center. It's the first major art center dedicated to Middle East and North African art. It's in Dubai, next to the Dubai Creek. This was also completed about 1.5 years ago. So the project features a series of courtyard gardens. There are 7 gardens, and each garden houses a desert climate garden that is taken from across the world. So we collaborated with Anouk Vogel, a really talented landscape artist architect, in which she began to assemble all these really, really beautiful plants from different desert climates around the world, and to place them into this courtyard almost as it were they were like sculptures, right? Where the boxes or the gallery collected art. Here, the courtyard and the gardens collected the sort of desert biome species. So this, yeah, and also in London, shortly after winning YAYA, we were also approached to do a competition for the BMW London Olympics Pavilion. So that was built, but of course it was dismantled. Recently, we were also this was about 3.5 years ago to design one of the building blocks for housing blocks for Royal Wharf. This is also nearing completion, should be completed end of this year. So what are we working? And of course, another competition that you may have seen. This is the RCA competition for their campus in Battersea. We love this project a lot, but unfortunately, we didn't win this one. So what are we working on right now? So on the board and also in construction is a resort, about a 28-room resort in Goa. Near Alibag. This is also nearing completion, but stopped for a bit because of COVID, but it should start up very soon. We also have a ashram, a 3,000-seater discourse hall for Jain ashram in Dharampur in India. So this is also under construction. You could see here as a series of interlocking rooms that are rotated 45 degrees as the room begins to climb up the volume. You could see there's an internal drum within the center. That's where the 3,000-seater hall is. So that's the arch that creates this 58-meter diameter column-free space. We were also lucky to have also won last year for the C40. This is in Paris competition, together with Tatiana Bilbao, Atelier Georges, and Bond Society, each of us taking 2 buildings each. This will be a carbon neutral development at the periphery of Paris in Port de Montreal, in which we are doing 2 buildings, 2 full timber buildings. So we are doing the building that spans the motorway between the 2 parts of Paris. And also under construction, it's a public realm project. It's a linear park housing 5 different pavilions of different plants and different climates. This is in Singapore. And also under construction, it's a twin tower, 758 apartments with vertical allotment gardens, 13 vertical allotment gardens that you could see at the corner, at the edge of the towers. That's where we are right now.
Great, well, thanks very much, Chris. It's amazing. So when you won YAYA in 2010, I think you had 14 architects working in the practice. How many are working now?
Oh, we have grown quite a bit. We have 3 offices now in London, in Mumbai and Singapore. If you put all the 3 offices together, we are about 45 people now.
Right. Yeah, that's great. Excellent. Well, thanks very much.
No, pleasure.
So hand over now to Fergus.
Great. Okay, I'll just take control. Is that projecting okay?
That's good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, all of you, Christopher and Stephanie. It's beautiful to see it's really wonderful to see your beautiful work, and it's really fascinating seeing the different routes that people who have won YAYA are kind of going on, and the trajectories, which is sometimes kind of quite intimidating. So this is Ed and I, who founded the practice back in 2010. But we actually started the practice kind of straight out of our part 1s, where we won this commission called T Pren, which is a small house in the Brecon Beacons in Wales, and it means house of wood. And it was a project that was really kind of formative for the practice. So it kind of set the tone in terms of our approach to materials. It set the tone in terms of our approach to working with clients, interpreting vernacular, and trying to kind of create a very quiet and simple architecture. Initially, of course, that was all kind of on domestic projects, and when we finished T Pren, it led to winning 4 new projects. So they were all domestic. Well, in fact, actually 3 were domestic, and one was working for my old state school in Bath, doing a simple master plan, and that was really important for us because we wanted to kind of escape domestic architecture as quickly as we could. So this was the practice. I think this was taken back in 2011 when we were based in Bethnal Green. And I was just going to touch on some of the big challenges that we faced at the time. So the challenges ranged from dealing with such kind of things as having very little money. That's a challenge that most practices face. I think Ed and I initially were kind of taking the biggest hit there, and I had also had started a family quite early, so I had a child during my part 2, and that meant that there were other kind of financial pressures. But all of that was quite helpful for us in a way, because it meant that we had to get organised, and we were desperate to kind of model ourselves on more organised practices, in order to grow and in order to make a living, and develop a little bit of agency. So to carry out research, make models, and do lots of the things that architects love to do. So sorry, it's just, there we go. Oh, sorry. If I go to this slide, one of the other challenges, which I think Stefanie touched on, was having very little built work. So we were trying to use one built project to win schools, to win offices, all sorts of things. So we were showing student projects, we were showing research, we were showing competitions, and these are all the kind of things that we were presenting to clients. And always, as a young practice, you're trying to kind of gain a reputation and gain respect. And I think for us, awards was particularly important for that. So I found some of the boards that we put together for our submission. And I think the format for Young Architect of the Year changes from time to time. And so that was quite interesting, seeing how different years there's been different formats to submit. I think we were given 2 A1 boards. And the previous year, I think there'd been a video and things. But so the projects that we won with were three built projects primarily, and 1 unbuilt. So they were all education projects, 2 for the state school I mentioned, and 1 for a preparatory school in Somerset. And they were very different in their typology and their form. So one of them is called the Lee Centre, and it was for a science, technology, engineering and maths building. And one of them was a simple teaching block called the Rose building. And that was surprisingly built to the stringent, terrible kind of Michael Gove standards. And then the other one was masonry building. And then finally, there was the Western building. That was a project on paper at that stage. But that went on to get shortlisted for the Sterling Prize, so it really served us very well. Just so winning Young Architect of the Year was always in our practice plan. We've always had a practice plan for growth, for development, for the types of sectors, and pretty much we've stuck to it. I think COVID-19 is going to deal a blow to our projections and plans, the same as for many practices. But so far, we've always stuck to it. And yeah, one of our major awards that we had always targeted was winning Young Architect of the Year, because we respected those practices so much. So that's all set out, and we review this and we update it on a regular basis, and it's a really useful tool. Another kind of key thing which we did was build our own studio in Waterloo. So we own this building that I'm sat in right now. We have a beautiful garden, and we're on a city farm. But we own the building, but we don't own the land. So it was always seen as a short-term thing for the practice. This was a shot from early when we moved in, and I think we were 12 people then. We're 21 now. And we've been growing at around 20% a year, something like that. Well, around, yeah, which equates to around 2 to 3 people a year. This is the barn on the site, and lots of our projects kind of have similar themes about being very lean, using timber in interesting ways, having very expressive structures. There was one much larger project that happened to enable us to do this, which came about in I think it was completed in 2017, and I'm sure that Young Architect of the Year was very helpful in giving us the credentials to win this. So this is a food development kind of campus for Charlie Bigham in Somerset, and it's a really large, well, it's an 8,000 square meter building. So for practice of our size, this was quite a departure. So that was a really great opportunity, and also to kind of bring in enough fees to be able to develop and do more research. More recently, or last year anyway, we completed the Western building at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, And this really kind of exemplified our approach to buildings in the landscape, using materials that have a certain pattern and a kind of subtlety, and looking at natural materials and qualities of natural light throughout the day and seasons. So this was massively instrumental for us, and in the similar way that YAYA kind of helped establish us, this project got to the Sterling shortlist, and it really helped kind of announce the practice. So just a few shots of that one. And then finally, just to touch on two projects that are, well, one which is actually coming to completion. This one is in Carlisle, and it's the first new building in the precinct for several hundred years, and the first building in this location since part of the priory was destroyed in the Reformation. So this has actually just had PC last Friday. This is a render, obviously, but we're about to get this photographed, and I think that will be the next big step for the practice in terms of our kind of PR. And then finally, a project that's really close to my heart is the National Railway Museum in York. This was a Malcolm Redding competition, and I think there were 70-something practices who initially applied and went down to a shortlist of 5. And it's a project that will both transform the site, will transform the museum. It's part of a huge, much wider master plan, but it's also of a scale and significance that I think this building can have a real impact, both on the city, but on the architectural discourse as well, because it's absolutely driven by sustainability throughout. It's a timber frame building. It's about 4,000 square meters. And it also incorporates the refurbishment of another 10,000 square meters of train sheds. So that's where we've got to so far, and yeah, it's been a very exciting and fortunate journey so far.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Fergus. Let's pick up on a point you made a bit earlier about having a strategy for the practice. I mean, that looked very kind of thought through. I mean, I notice a lot, in architecture, you get practices that, you're very, very true to design principles. The design, the architecture is of paramount importance. But you also see practices which end up sort of working for very big clients, end up doing very corporate architecture. I would say quite anonymous architecture. I mean, this is something that you've thought about when developing your strategy. I mean, how true you want to be to your architectural principles.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think it's absolutely fundamental, because it comes down to the brand of a practice, and it comes down to your reputation and the types of work that come after the projects that you've delivered. So I think for us, we still turn down the majority of the projects that we hear about or that we're approached about, because even when times are difficult, I think it's still really fundamental that you have a set of aligned values with your clients, and that you believe that you can stick to what you're really good at and where you add value. Because I think if we all just took everything that came along or that we saw on the horizon, the trouble is, you can become very diluted, and you find very quickly you've lost your identity and reputation. So that's my opinion. I expect the others agree. So.
I'm interested to hear, what Chris and Stefanie have got to say on this subject. I mean, Chris, you're pretty big now and doing a lot of projects all over the world. I mean, have you sort of considered how you manage this challenge?
I agree with Fergus. That balance one has to keep, but I think more fundamental than that is that I just don't know how else to do other people's architecture. I only know how to do the type of work we do, and we do it best. Yeah, I suppose you just have to be yourself, because everyone else is taken.
And Stefanie?
Yes, I think I would agree with that. I mean, I think for us it's more, it's not so much the type of project, it's more the setup, the client, the ambitions, and the values that are part of that project. So we work on pretty much lots of different kinds of projects, including also sort of domestic work. It's and some of those are do give, we do not necessarily they work on them in a different way, but it's clearer that they're going to make a profit from the outset than others. And you have to keep that balance, but we still try to very much ensure that these projects are of interest and that we can add a value that we believe in along the way.
Okay, thank you. Again, as a general question for everybody, and I think again, Fergus, you alluded to this in your presentation, but I mean, how do small practices break into new building typologies? So you've just done domestic extensions. A big challenge is getting away from that, but equally, I guess if you've done several schools and you want to do a tall building, let's say, for the sake of argument, I mean, how do you break into that area of work, convince people that you're a safe pair of hands?
Well, for us, we always try to position ourselves away from kind of domestic architecture. So part of that was about, how you put together the practice brochure, how you put together your website, how you're pitching for projects. I mean, specifically when pitching for a new sector, I would almost draw a kind of a Venn diagram with all of the different interests that the client might have or that the project might have. And the project is at the center of it. It might be that you've never done one of those, but you've done all the different components around it. And you can then pitch to them and say, we haven't done one of these, but what we can bring is we can bring all of the knowledge of the areas that you might be concerned about, and we can add this value because we're coming from this different perspective. So, I mean, I think that's certainly kind of, it's been reasonably helpful for us. And always getting to know the client or getting to know the brief properly, because there's been so many student projects, or it might be that probably all of us have been teaching at some points. And so you do get to learn about different typologies, but you've got to bring that knowledge to the client to make sure that they're confident in you. That's our approach anyway.
And a question to you, Chris, really. I mean, you've done some pretty big projects, but I don't know if you've ever done an airport or a railway station or something like that. We can't hear you.
Oh, I think it's a real challenge breaking into sort of new typology. I think for us, I think I can only speak from our experience. I think there's no easy way to this. I think one of things that worked for us really was to do competitions, especially when we started. Open competitions, because that's where there's no limit or the stupid requirement of that you have to do a particular building in this particular context before you're allowed to do this particular building in this particular context, which is completely nonsensical. So the only way we found ourselves was to do a lot of open competitions, and we were lucky to win very big ones in close succession. The other was, of course, is to, maybe I'm also speaking from the point of view of, I was not born in the UK. I came here when I was a student, and having no strong network, let's say, in the UK, we had to make sure that our architecture is so distinct that you can't be ignored. So it's a very, very difficult strategy, but that's what we did.
Great, thanks. And I mean, the competitions, I mean, I can see it's a great way of sort of breaking into sort of new clients, new areas, new countries even. I mean, I guess the downside is they take up an awful lot of work and resource. I mean, presumably it's worth it for you though.
Well, in the early days, we had no choice. Of course, now we try not to do it at all, open competition. But when we were starting out, we had no choice, and we thought there are very few very good open competitions that were around. So we picked those we thought we had a chance of winning.
Right. Thanks. And Stefanie, I mean, have you won any work through competitions? Is this a way for you to sort of, expand your horizon, so to speak?
I think in terms of open competitions, we are very careful, because they do take a lot of competitions take a huge amount of work if you do them properly, and open competitions is just very you just have to be very careful whether that actually, either because you've got an interest and you want to do the research, and that's a way of structuring the research about a certain typology that you want to do or a certain kind of project, and you've got the resources available at that point, or you sort of really need to know that there's a reasonable chance. We have one. I mean, the Bethnal Green Methodist Church was an invited competition, so we have won work through competitions. We do get a lot of work through community groups, or sort of knowing each other and sort of approaching us, and we having conversations and saying, actually, let's just have a discussion and have a look and sort of see what might be possible, and then projects grow out of that. But they take a very long time, and the project with the community hall and the 70 flats that I showed earlier in Lambeth, I mean, the first conversations happened in 2015. So it just, you know, you sort of that's been our approach, that sort of nurturing and growing and discussion based, developing project possibilities in a way.
Okay, just want to move on to about sort of growing your practice. I mean, some people have very ambitious plans and they've got targets and all that kind of thing. I mean, how do you sort of grow a practice? I mean, I guess it's partly planning, it's partly work coming in, but crucially, it has to be sustainable. You don't overstretch yourself. I mean, how do you manage that? Christopher?
For us, it's definitely by necessity rather than by, you know, by being wanting to. For us, I think what over the past, I would say 5-6 years, we've grown quite a bit. And one thing that we felt that we always wanted to watch out is not to keep an eye on, let's say, winning the biggest project, and winning the biggest project will therefore sort out all your financial worries. We felt that that's not sustainable. I think what's more important is to have a steady stream of work, despite the scale. And we felt that by maintaining that rhythm and that consistency, it really gave us a very strong footing financially for the practice. So I would say grow because you need to, not because you want to.
Right, I see. And I mean, Fergus, you had you shared this your strategy for the practice. I mean, does that include how many people you want to employ by a specific date or anything like that?
It does, but I think it's normally governed by the projects that we win. But actually, you know, it's much easier to win the projects first and then grow accordingly, assuming that the projects aren't so vast. So most of our projects are kind of, you know, they've been increasing in scale, but only moderately each year. And of course, 20% compound growth over, say, 10 years is actually quite a large growth in terms of project size. But at least it didn't all happen at once, because I think when we set up, because we were set up straight out of, well, it's straight out of part 2, but we've been doing projects from part 1. It meant that we were quite concerned about our lack of experience. So we wanted to be able to prove that we could deliver each project of each scale as we went, and we didn't want to kind of get ahead of ourselves. So we were quite conscious of that. And I think the growth which we foresee is going to be kind of similar. So we're you know, if the economy recovers and if we can still win work and things, we're assuming that we would like to get to between kind of 35 to 50 people in the next 3 or 4 years. That's the intention, but nothing too big, because the degree of control, I mean, it's brilliant seeing Christopher's work, but it's very hard to control these big projects, and it takes, you know, it's really impressive that practices can do that, but I think we don't have those controls in place yet. So we're developing them, but it's great seeing good big practices who can deliver that. But I've seen lots of practices who suddenly grow, and sometimes you see that they struggle with that, and that's definitely what we want to avoid.
Thank you. And
I think it's also in terms of sort of control and how much involvement in what level of detail you want to have per project, and that's for us. I think I mean, we're 3 directors, so that makes it in a way easier to grow, because it's easier to keep an oversight, but we also don't want to lose the sort of culture of discussions of how we develop ideas and how we develop proposals and projects. So for us, I think we've been growing very, very slowly. I mean, we started as 2.5. We're now 5, you know, 6 years on, and I think that is very much that kind of sort of we really enjoy being involved in sort of different aspects of a project, and being involved together as a team to work them through. Saying that, the projects we got on at the moment will, you know, we probably will need to grow because of the sort of variety and scale, but we do want to do that organically and slowly, and make sure that we can also offer good employment and ensure that you know, that we know for sure that the fees are there and can cover that, because I think that's, and that we're also able to offer good work-life balance and benefits, because that's one of the reasons we set up a practice as well, so that we could enjoy that.
Great,
Whether
thank you.
that's a different discussion.
And so we're nearly out of time. I've got one more question for each of our panelists. So could each of you just give your tips to young practitioners starting out, what they should really do to be successful? Who, like Christopher, do you want to go first?
Well, I can only speak from my experience. I would say look further afield.
So I look
further afield.
Look further afield, right? Okay. Stephanie?
For me, it would be to sort of just ignore the hot air, because there's lots of, in architecture, like it's very easy to feel like an imposter, to not have the confidence, and it's just mainly lots of people spouting hot air, and you just have to, in a way, ignore that and be confident in what you're doing.
Okay. Fergus?
For me, it's about kind of maintaining the quality of the outputs and making sure that everything that the practice puts forward, whether it's your website or your kind of PR material, that everything has a quality to it. So the same as your build, you know, all of your finished projects and your realized projects. But if you can maintain that quality, then your reputation will build over time, and people will trust you, and you've got to invest in those relationships. So it's quite a holistic kind of picture, and if the quality of your outputs is maintained at a high level, then hopefully the work will come, and your work will continue to get better.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Well, I'd like to extend my thanks to our 3 architects who have joined us today, and good luck with all your projects, and thank you to our audience for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for inviting me. Thank you.